Hi everyone, welcome to today's class, which is next in the series on animal tissues. Now in the last class we have studied about epithelial tissues. Now today we are going to take up another important tissues among the animals, and that is connective tissue. And connective tissue you will find only in those animals where mesoderm is also present, because it is mesodermal in origin. So let's begin our class with connective tissue. So if we define what is connective tissue, as the name suggests, connective, that means it connects. Then not only that, it supports, binds or separates other tissues or organs, and in this connective tissue there are fewer cells if we compare with the other types of tissues, and the cells are wide apart. In between those cells there are large intercellular spaces which are filled with an amorphous matrix. Now since the cells are far apart, so in case of connective tissue we won't be coming across the cell junctions which we had studied with the epithelial tissue. Now connective tissue, as far as origin is concerned, it comes from the embryonic germ layer, and that is from mesoderm. And initially in the mesoderm, the earliest form which develops, there too the cells are far apart with a matrix in between, and that is termed mesenchyme. And from that mesenchyme the connective tissue develops. Now all connective tissue have certain components, and those components are of course their cells and the matrix. And out of the cells also we can put them into two categories: the resident cells, that means the cells which are part and parcel of the connective tissue, and the other one is the immigrant cells, that means the cells which can reach into the connective tissue from the capillaries. They can come out of the capillaries and enter into the tissue. So the resident cells here are fibroblasts, which is one of the most characteristic cells of the connective tissue, and as the name suggests, these cells are the ones which will be secreting different types of fibers which are constituent of the extracellular matrix. Chondroblasts, these are the cartilaginous cells, and they will be found in the cartilage tissue where they secrete the matrix which is found in the cartilage. Chondrocytes, those are mature cartilage cells. Osteoblasts and osteocytes, these are bone cells, and osteoblasts are immature cells while osteocytes are the mature cells. Adipocytes, these are the fat cells. Macrophages, these are phagocytic cells. So these are some of the important resident cells which we will find in the connective tissue. And immigrant cells, of course, the ones which are coming from the blood, so these are the various types of WBCs. RBCs, of course, cannot leave the capillaries unless the capillary is punctured, so that won't be counted here. Rest of the other blood cells can be taken up. Then coming to the extracellular fibers. Now here there can be three different types of fibers. The most abundant fibers, or rather the most abundant protein in the animal world, is collagen, and the fibers made from collagen, those can be called collagen fibers. Since they are white in color, so they can also be called white fibers. And these fibers, as we can see, they are very thin unbranched fibers, and they occur in bundles. So number of fibers, they are arranged one over the other, forming wavy bundles. Now the property of this type of fibers is that these fibers, they have very high tensile strength. That means if there is external force applied on it, their shape will not get disorganized. So they have high tensile strength, high resilience, but they don't have elasticity. So the property of these white collagen fibers is tensile strength. And these collagen fibers, if they are put in hot boiling water, so their fibrous nature is destroyed and it forms a gelatin. So animal gelatin is used in number of food products like ice creams and all, and that is coming from the animal protein. Then coming to elastic fibers. Elastic fibers are made from a protein that is elastin, and these are yellow in color, so they are also called yellow fibers. These are thicker and branched. So these are thick and branched, and as the name itself suggests that these are elastic in nature. That means if these are stretched, they will be easily able to stretch, but once the force is removed, they will return to their original position. So that's what we mean by elasticity. Then lastly, we can mention another one, that is reticular fibers. Reticular fibers are made up of a protein reticulin, which is considered to be a type of collagen only, because collagen itself is of many types. Nearly 29 different types of collagen are reported from the animal world. But anyway, here we can mention the term reticulin protein. Now these fibers are very thin, highly branched. For that we can use the word anastomosing. So these are highly branched, that is anastomosing fibers, and they form a network. So that's why it gets the name reticular, which means a network. So they form a network, and they are not elastic. So they are inelastic in their property. So these are inelastic fibers. Forming a meshwork. Then the rest of the other matrix, that is the amorphous matrix, that consists of these various organic biomolecules like proteoglycans, that is glycan is polysaccharide and with this a protein component attached, glycoaminoglycans, so these are also polysaccharides which have amino group with them, and glycoproteins, that is proteins with a sugar moiety. So these are the various substances found in the ground matrix, and these are associated along with the fibers. Then along with that there can be some minerals also present, and depending on the amount of minerals, like mostly it is the calcium salts, so more is the mineralization, that will lead to the hardness of the tissue, and if the mineralization is not there, then the tissue will be quite soft. Now let us take the classification of connective tissue, how many different types of connective tissue are there in the body. So here we have a broad classification, that is loose connective tissue, dense, and the specialized connective tissue. The loose and the dense connective tissue can also be called connective tissue proper, and these are called loose or dense depending on the amount of fibers in the matrix. If the fibers are lesser, then it is loose, and if there are abundant fibers in the matrix, then it becomes dense. Then these loose connective tissue will be studying into two types, that is areolar and adipose, although there are others also, like there is reticular connective tissue and the embryonic connective tissue similar to areolar but with much fewer fibers and more gelatinous matrix, that is the mucoid connective tissue. In the dense connective tissue we have dense regular and dense irregular, and a specialized connective tissue we will categorize into skeletal and vascular or the fluid connective tissue. And in the skeletal connective tissue we will study cartilage and bone, that is the component of our endoskeleton, and in the fluid or the vascular connective tissue, the blood and the lymph. However, these two components, the blood and the lymph, we will be doing in the chapter on circulation of body fluids and not in this particular chapter. Now let us use this information and solve one question. Collagen fibers are secreted by. Now whether it is collagen fibers or yellow elastic fibers or reticular fibers, the fibers are secreted by the most important resident cell of the connective tissue, that is fibroblast. So that will make option 2 as our correct answer. Now let's start with our discussion on the loose connective tissue. the loose connective tissue, and in this, the first one, the areolar connective tissue. Now here we have a section through areolar. In this, what all we can see, this cell here from which the fibers are emerging, this one is the fibroblast. As we can see that it is a cell from which number of cytoplasmic processes are arising. Now the fibers, the thicker unbranched fibers that are shown here in the form of bundles, so these are the collagen fibers. These yellow colored ones, branch fibers, these are the elastic fibers. Now this cell here, this is mast cell. Highly branched fiber, anastomosing fiber, this one is the reticular fiber. These cells in which large oil droplet can be seen, this is adipocyte, and the rest of the remaining ground substance here, of course, that is the matrix. And here this large cell with number of pseudopodia arising from it, this one is the macrophage. So from this we can see the various cell types which are listed over here. The fibroblasts, and as we know, these fibroblasts are the ones which secrete fibers. Macrophages, these are phagocytes. And these are derived from one of the type of WBCs, that is monocytes. The monocytes, when from the capillaries they enter into the tissues, they become their resident phagocytic cells, and they are then termed macrophages. The mast cells, these are oval cells, and they secrete histamine, which is a very potent vasodilator. That means it will increase the cross-sectional diameter of the blood vessel, arteries and arterioles. So histamine, then there is serotonin, this is a vasoconstrictor, that means it will reduce the diameter, and also there is one anticoagulant, heparin. So these are secreted by mast cells. And then there is another type of cell which is not always seen, because in the healthy tissue it won't be seen. These are very short-lived cells, and they will be formed from one of the type of WBCs, that is the B lymphocytes. And these are formed when there is some infection, and the purpose of these cells is to secrete antibodies. So these are highly short-lived cells, and their nucleus appears like a cartwheel. So that's why they are also called cartwheel cells. So these are, as we said, short-lived cells, and they are not shown in the diagram because they are not easily seen also, and they secrete antibodies. And as we had shown in the diagram, few adipocytes, they are of course fat storing cells. Now the Function of these areolar tissue is that it serves as a support framework for epithelium, because under the epithelium there is always some connective tissue, and that is basically formed by this areolar tissue. And in whichever body organ there is no support of the endoskeleton, that is bone or the cartilage, the entire framework is supported by areolar. Then areolar is also present under the skin, where it attaches the skin, that is the integument, to the underlying muscles. And since it is a loose connective tissue, that means there are fewer fibers, so the diffusion can easily take place through it. So from one tissue to the other, in between always this areolar connective tissue is present, like packing material, and nutrients and waste can easily move from one part to the other via these areolar connective tissue. Now the next one, that is the adipose. Now adipose is a kind of areolar with some modifications, where the fibers are less and the most abundant cells are the fat storing cells, that is the adipocytes, which are also called signet ring cells, because when we microscopically examine them, the whole space is taken up by the oil droplet, and as a result the cytoplasm and the nucleus have become peripheral. So that gives us the appearance of a signet ring. And this fat which is present inside, if we see this, this is one adipocyte, and this entire structure here, this is the fat globule. And this is in the form of oil, that is in the form of a liquid droplet. Now on the basis of this, if this entire fat is one single globule is there, such an adipocyte is called monolocular. So there we have the term monolocular, and if there are many fat droplets, then it is termed multilocular. So on this basis, the adipose tissue can be classified into two different types, whether it is having monolocular adipocytes or it is having multilocular adipocytes, and these are accordingly called white adipose tissue and the brown adipose tissue. Now the white adipose tissue, it is containing monolocular adipocytes. It contains monolocular adipocytes, and this adipose tissue, it is found under the skin around the kidneys, eyeballs, and even the blubber of the whale, the hump of the camel, all that is also having this white adipose tissue. The brown adipose tissue, it contains the multilocular adipocytes, and this tissue is found only in mammals. And this tissue, why does it appear brown? Because it has more number of mitochondria in it, and here the fat is oxidized to generate heat, not ATP, not chemical energy, but heat energy. That's why we are using the term thermogenic, that is heat producing. So it is a heat producing tissue found only in mammals, and in mammals too maximally found in the newborn babies and the hibernating mammals like polar bears, polar foxes in them. Now what is the basic function of the adipose tissue? So for adipose tissue, it is present under the skin as an insulator. That means since mammals, they are warm blooded animals, so the body heat which is generated is not lost to the surrounding because of this fatty layer. And then as in case of whales, we mentioned that it is forming the blubber of the whale, so there it is providing buoyancy as well, fat being lighter than water. And the other thing of course is thermogenic nature, that is providing sufficient heat in the newborn babies and the hibernating mammals where they are not doing much work to generate heat. Then it is present around the body organs like kidneys, eyeballs, the delicate organs, so it is forming a cushioning layer to protect them from any outside external shocks. Then there is one more special thing, that these monolocular adipocytes, they secrete a hormone also. Monolocular adipocytes secrete leptin hormone. Now the word leptos means thin. So the basic idea here is that once the adipocytes have stored sufficient amount of fat, leptin hormone begins to be secreted and it reaches to the brain in the hypothalamus, where we have our appetite center, and it curbs the appetite, that is, it prevents hunger, so that the body is giving a cue that further eating is not required as sufficient fat has been stored. Now let us take this information and solve a question. So here, areolar tissue joins, integument to muscles, bone to muscle, bone to bone, fat body to the muscle. Now areolar, as we mentioned, it is present in the skin and it is attaching the skin to the muscle. So that means our right answer is option number 1. Now another one, mast cells secrete hippurine, myoglobin, histamine, hemoglobin. So mast cells secrete histamine, serotonin and heparin. So out of that, histamine is given here, which is a vasodilator, and that makes option 3 as our correct answer. Now let's take one more question. Now here, this is a diagrammatic question where a diagram is given, and if you see this diagram, this is a section through areolar tissue where 4 parts are marked. So we have to see that which of the option correctly identifies the marked region, and then we have to accordingly take that option. So given below is the diagrammatic sketch of a certain type of connective tissue. Identify the parts labeled A, B, C and D and select the right option. Now let us see A. This is the highly irregular cell with number of pseudopodia arising from it. So that means A is a macrophage. So we can start mentioning it here. This one is a macrophage. B is a fibroblast. C is collagen. And D, this one is the mast cell. Now let us check the options. Part A, macrophage. Part B, fibroblast. Part C, collagen. And part D, mast cell. So that means the first choice itself is the correct one. So we can mark this as our answer. Now let's move on to the dense connective tissue. Dense connective tissue is the connective tissue in which the matrix has abundant fibers, increasing its density. Now here, since there are fibers, so certainly fibers secreting cells will also be there, that is fibroblasts. Now on the basis of the arrangement of the fibers, it could be dense regular or dense irregular. Now in this case, as we see the orientation of the fibers, so the fibers are parallelly arranged, they are showing a regular pattern, and in between the fibers we have these fibroblasts there. Now this dense regular connective tissue, once it is oriented in such a way that it forms a cord-like arrangement. So it forms cord-like arrangement. Now depending on which fibers are there, that is the white collagen fibers or the yellow elastic fibers, we can further classify this dense regular connective tissue into two types. One is the tendons. The tendons basically have parallel bundles of white fibers, and between two bundles there is a single row of fibroblasts arranged, and these tendons, they join the muscle to the bone or even the cartilage. But basically the most important thing is that the muscle requires a rigid support against which it will contract, and the muscle is attached to the bone by the help of these tendons. The other one is the ligaments. They have abundant yellow fibers, that means elastic fibers are more and there are few white fibers, and of course with some scattered fibroblasts, and these ligaments, they join the bone to the bone. Now we usually come across two very common terms in our day-to-day language, that is the sprain and the strain. Now the word sprain actually means that these ligaments are excessively stretched beyond their capacity, so that becomes painful. So sprain is tear or excessive stretching in ligaments. And when we use the term strain, so that is tears in the either the tendons or the muscle. Now moving on to the dense irregular connective tissue. Now here the orientation of the fibers is in an irregular pattern. That means the fibers are going in different directions so that it forms a sheet-like arrangement. So it is not cord-like, but it is forming a sheet. So it is found as a covering sheath in several body parts. Here we are mentioning a few of them, that is in the skin, that is the top layer of the skin, of course, is epidermis, which is epithelial tissue, but beneath is the dermis is connective tissue. So in that dermis of the skin we will find dense irregular connective tissue. Dura mater, this is the meninx surrounding the central nervous system, that is the brain and the spinal cord. Periosteum, that is a covering sheath over the bone. So these all are formed of this dense irregular, and later we will find that many other body parts also we will be finding these covering sheaths formed by dense irregular connective tissue, and usually in short we just mention it as DICT, that is dense irregular connective tissue. Now moving on to the specialized connective tissue, and in this we are taking up the skeletal tissue. Now skeletal tissue, here the matrix is solid. It is not gelatinous as we were seeing in the other tissues. So here it is solid and it is secreted by the resident cells. In case of cartilage, those resident cells are chondroblasts, and in case of bone it is the osteoblasts. Now starting with cartilage. Now cartilage is one of the skeletal connective tissue which is quite pliable. That means it can be turned and it will return to its original shape. But at the same time it is elastic. That means it is returning to the original shape. Its shape is not going to be distorted. And so wherever the body requires strength along with flexibility, we will find cartilage. And in cartilage, we will find there is perichondrium, cartilage cells and the matrix. So let us see a section through a cartilage. So here we have a transverse section. This is a TS through the cartilage, and in this outermost, this is the covering sheath, which is the perichondrium, which is again the dense irregular connective tissue, and just along with this perichondrium on the inner side there are some of the immature cartilage cells which are called chondroblasts. Now these chondroblasts are the ones which are secreting the matrix here, the substance which is all present here, this is all the matrix. And in the matrix of the cartilage there are protein complexes called chondrin, and basically there are a number of other organic substances. Fibers, present in it. Now when these chondroblasts, after secreting sufficient amount of the matrix, they themselves get surrounded by that matrix, and once they are surrounded by the matrix they are called chondrocyte, and they are the mature cell now. So chondrocytes are the ones which are surrounded by matrix on all sides, but they are not in direct contact with the matrix, but they are separated from the matrix by a fluid filled space, and that fluid filled space is called lacuna. And if we see these chondrocytes, they are quite angular in shape, and these chondrocytes still continue to divide. So we will find them in these groups 2, 4 cells, which are also called the cell nest. Now cartilage is one tissue which grows throughout life. So it continues to grow, but the growth will only be in one direction, that is new matrix is being secreted, so the growth is occurring only in one direction. Now within this matrix, as we said, there are fibers present, but there is certainly something which is totally absent, and that is the capillaries. So within the matrix there are no capillaries at all. So in other words, we can say cartilage is avascular. Avascular tissue. So how do the cells get nourishment? So there are certainly blood vessels outside the perichondrium, and from there, from the capillaries, the nutrients will be diffusing and they will be passing through the matrix. And matrix being totally organic, the substances can easily diffuse and reach up till the underlying cells. Now this cartilage is divided, or we can say it is classified according to the different substances present in the matrix into 3 different types. And these are hyaline, fibrocartilage and the yellow elastic cartilage. Now the hyaline word means glass-like. Why does it appear glass-like? Because when we see it in section, so it appears almost translucent, and that reason is that there are very few fibers in the matrix. The fibers are there, white collagen fibers are there, but they are very, very few, and that's why it appears translucent in the section. And rest we can see these chondrocytes present inside their lacuna. Then the other one, fibrocartilage, or it is also called the white fibrocartilage. It is so called because in its matrix there are abundant white fibers. White fibers are abundant, and here the perichondrium is also incomplete or it is absent. So because of this, this white fibrocartilage is very strong, but at the same time the flexibility is reduced. So it is strongest cartilage. Then the last but not the least, the elastic cartilage. Here the matrix has abundant yellow fibers, that is yellow elastic fibers in the matrix. So as a result, it is the most flexible cartilage. This one is most flexible or most pliable. Then this hyaline cartilage, with age it gets calcified. Calcified means that in the matrix there will be calcium salts deposited. As a result, its flexibility will decrease, because inorganic minerals increase the strength but they decrease the flexibility. So hyaline cartilage calcifies with age. Now let us see the location of these three different cartilages in our body, where they are found. So here we have the human skeleton, and this is the key, the three types of cartilage that we have mentioned: fibrocartilage, hyaline cartilage and the elastic cartilage. Now at the end of each bone, where one bone is articulating with another bone, there is a cartilage present that can be called articular cartilage, because that is helping in articulation. So this articular cartilage is hyaline cartilage. And the costal cartilage, that is the cartilage at the end of the rib which joins with the sternum, that is the costal cartilage. So even that is hyaline. Then initially in the fetal life, the entire skeleton is formed of the hyaline cartilage, which of course then ossifies to form a bony skeleton. So the fetal endoskeleton, then the endoskeleton of cartilage fishes, that is also made up of hyaline cartilage. Coming on to this fibrocartilage, these two we have marked here, that is the intervertebral disc. Between the two vertebrae there is a cartilaginous disc, and the pubic symphysis, which is joining the pubic bone or the two halves of the pelvic girdle. So there, this is white fibrocartilage. And lastly, the elastic cartilage, the nose tip, that is elastic, the ear pinna, that is the external ear auricle, that is having elastic cartilage, and another one, that is eustachian tube. Eustachian tube is a narrow tube which connects the middle ear to the pharynx. So even that is made up of elastic cartilage. Now let us take up a question. Nucleus pulposus is present in. Now first of all, nucleus pulposus is a remnant of the embryonic notochord. So try to remember, the notochord in case of vertebrates gets replaced by vertebral column. So let us just see here, these are the vertebrae, and between the vertebrae this is the intervertebral disc. And in this intervertebral disc, if we cut a section through it, there is a remnant of notochord, and that remnant of notochord is called nucleus pulposus. So that means the answer should be the center of intervertebral disc, that is option number 4. Now let's take one more question. The kind of tissue that forms the supportive structure in our pinna is also found in. So first we have to recall what kind of cartilage makes up the pinna. So pinna is formed of elastic cartilage. Now out of these 4 options, nails are part of exoskeleton made up of keratin. Ear ossicles, that is the malleus, incus and the stapes, they are formed of bone, they don't have cartilage at all. The tip of the nose, that is certainly cartilage, and it is elastic cartilage. Vertebrae of course are bone. So that means here option 3 is the correct answer. Now let's study bone and its structure. Now another of these skeletal connective tissue, that is bone. Bone is the hardest tissue of the body, and that's right, it is the hardest tissue, as hard as steel but lesser in weight. And this tissue should not be confused with the hardest substance, that is enamel. Enamel is not a tissue, it is a substance secreted by one of the cells while our teeth are being formed, while bone is a proper tissue. Now the hardness of the bone is due to that it has abundant inorganic matrix. The 75% of the bone mass is made up of inorganic substance, and there the most important one is calcium phosphate, that is why called bone salt. And this calcium phosphate along with calcium hydroxide is present as hydroxyapatite with this complex formula, and this structure forms a hexagonal crystal structure. Then there is organic matrix, which is making up 25% of the bone mass, and out of that 25%, 90% of it is the collagen, and this collagen is binding these hydroxyapatite. So both of them in combination are forming the structure within the matrix, and along with collagen there are proteoglycans, glycoaminoglycans and glycoproteins. And one of the specific proteins, that is the way we, in case of cartilage, we had mentioned chondrin, here it is oscine. Now to study bone there are two different methods. One is that we can put the bone in dilute hydrochloric acid, and when we keep the bone in dilute hydrochloric acid, what happens, all these calcium salts, they get removed and only the organic part remains. Now such a bone is very soft and it can be easily cut with a razor, and such bone is called decalcified bone. So here, as the name itself suggests, decalcified means where the calcium has been removed. So this is prepared by keeping it in dilute hydrochloric acid. The other way is that we strongly heat the bone. Now when we heat it, what happens is that all the organic matrix is destroyed along with the bone marrow which is filled in. Now such a bone will retain its hardness. This will have to be cut by a proper saw, and such a bone is called dried bone. So there are these different ways. If we want to study the inorganic component, then in that case we'll use a dried bone. If we want to study the organic component, we'll use a decalcified bone. Now taking up the gross anatomy of a bone. Now this is one of the limb bone, and if you are able to recognize it, this is the bone of the thigh, that is the femur bone. Now here at the end of the bones there is the articular cartilage, and which articular cartilage is there? That is hyaline. So here first we can mark this as the articular cartilage. Then the ends of the long bones, these are called the epiphyses. So here this end we can mark it as epiphysis, while the middle part, that is called the diaphysis or the shaft. Now there are two different types of bones. In the epiphyseal region, as we see that, because this is partially sectioned, so we'll see that there are a number of pores seen, and it gives the appearance of a sponge. So this part of the bone is called spongy bone. while the bone which is present in the diaphysis, this one is called compact bone. So within the same bone there are two different types of structures present. Then inside the bone, if we cut through it, there is a cavity which is called the marrow cavity, and in this marrow cavity bone marrow is filled in. Bone marrow is also connective tissue, and that is one of the connective tissue called the reticular connective tissue. And the bone is covered by this covering sheath which is made of the dense irregular connective tissue, and this is the periosteum. So this is the gross anatomy of a bone. Now let us take up the detailed histology of the bone. Now here from this bone we are taking a small section and magnifying it. So what do we see here? That within the bone, this outer structure, this is the periosteum, and the side which is facing towards the marrow cavity, there also there is a covering that is called endoosteum. Then within the bone there are these longitudinal canals, and within these canals we can see there is the blood vessels, lymph vessel, and also nerve, which is not shown here. The nerve are passing through it. Now these longitudinal canals, these are called Haversian canals. And these Haversian canals are connected by these transverse canals, and these transverse canals are called Folkman's canals. Now within this region we can see there are concentric rings present around each Haversian canal. Here this is the Haversian canal, and in this surrounding concentric rings of the matrix is present, and this entire one concentric ring is called osteon or the Haversian system. Now this Haversian system or osteon is a characteristic only of the mammalian bone. So this kind of arrangement we will be seeing only in the TS through the mammalian bone. So in this case there are the structures that we need to know is that the bone is having two covering sheaths. Unlike the cartilage which was having only one covering sheath on the outer side, here there are two covering sheaths, outer periosteum and the inner one endoosteum. Now near both periosteum and endoosteum there are few layers of the bone forming cells, that is the osteoblast, which secrete again the bony matrix, and when they themselves get surrounded by the bony matrix, then they are called osteocytes. So this is a osteocyte, that is the mature cell, and this osteocyte is having number of protoplasmic processes, and here the space which is separating it from the matrix, that is lacuna, and here even the lacuna has a small regions in which the cytoplasmic processes are lying in it, and these are called canaliculi, which literally means the little canal. And this portion here, this is the matrix. Now the matrix is present in the form of plates, and such matrix is called lamella. So in case of bone, the matrix is lamellar, and number of concentric rings of these lamella are present, and between these the osteocytes are present here. So here the arrangement is in such a way, because since the matrix is having lot of solid component, there is more of inorganic material. So from the blood the diffusion cannot take place to a very far off region. So the cells are accumulated near the source of the nourishment, and that's why this type of concentric arrangement can be seen. Now this structure that we are seeing here, this one is actually the structure of the compact bone. While at the epiphyseal ends, there the bone present is the spongy bone, and even here on the sides a small amount of spongy bone is there. So if we see this spongy bone, the spongy bone doesn't have a Haversian system. Rather, here the osteocytes are arranged in this matrix. Here this is the matrix. These are the osteocytes, but as we can see, there is no Haversian canal over here, and on the outer side there are these cells, one more of the bone cell, that is the osteoclast. Now osteoclasts are the bone eating cells, that is they remove the bony matrix. Now when is such a need required? That is, if the amount of calcium in the blood is less, then in that case the osteoclast activity will increase, it will remove the bony matrix, and that particular calcium will be added to the blood. So the bone is a dynamic tissue where the calcium and phosphate is balanced between the bone and the blood. Now this bone arrangement where there is no Haversian system, this one is the spongy bone, and this spongy bone is also called trabeculate bone, because here the entire bone, if we see, it is in the form of number of small beams, and the word trabeculae actually means little beams. So it is like number of beams like this are present, and if we take a section through one of the trabecula, so we will see this kind of arrangement. So this is this arrangement that we are seeing over here. So this is how it is arranged. So it will appear as if number of beams are arranged one over the other. So it will appear to be highly unorganized, but actually they are present in such a direction that they can sustain the weight of the body, and they can easily help the body to still maintain its structure. Now the same thing, compact bone, it contains the Haversian systems or the osteons, and within it the marrow cavity, it is filled with yellow bone marrow in the adults, and this yellow bone marrow is actually, it is rich in lipids. So where does it occur? In the outer parts of all bones and also in the diaphysis of long bones. The other one, that is the spongy bone, it contains trabeculae, which are thin intersecting bars of the matrix, and here the osteocytes are irregularly placed, they are not in the form of the concentric rings, and Haversian system is absent. This is found in the epiphysis of the long bones, the skull bones, sternum, ribs. We will find the spongy bone, and the term spongy here doesn't mean that this bone is soft like a sponge. It is equally hard. It is just the arrangement that gives it the appearance under the light microscope when we cut a section through it of a dried bone. So because of the pores, the marrow cavities are empty, so it gives the appearance of a sponge, that's why it is so called. And here the marrow cavities between the trabeculae, these are filled with the red bone marrow. So here there is red bone marrow filled in. This red bone marrow is the tissue where hemopoiesis, that is formation of blood cells, takes place. So all blood cells, that is WBCs, RBCs, platelets, they are forming from the stem cells present in the red bone marrow. The yellow bone marrow is not involved in hemopoiesis unless there is emergency, that is there is excessive blood loss. In that case it will return to its embryonic stage and start manufacturing blood cells. Now this was one classification on the basis of structure. There is another classification on the basis of origin, from where the bone arises. So one of the bone is the replacing or the cartilaginous bone, or simply cartilage bone we can name them. Now here, as the name suggests, replacing, that means these bones are formed by replacing the cartilage. So in the embryonic life, as we said, the fetal endoskeleton is initially formed by cartilage. And in the cartilage also there are cartilage eating cells, those are called chondroclast. So those chondroclast will remove the cartilaginous matrix, and the osteoblast, that is the bone forming cells, will lay the bony matrix. So this is how the replacement will take place. An example of such bones, the limb bones, vertebrae, thoracic cage, and when we say thoracic cage, that means sternum and the ribs, and on the back of course the vertebrae are there. Then coming to the investing or the dermal bones. Now dermis is the connective tissue present below the epidermis, and in this dermis ossification occurs, and all the skull bones, the cranium and the facial bones, clavicle, that is our collarbone, they are formed in this manner. And coming to sesamoid bones. Sesamoid, the word sesame, that comes for the seed. So these are seed shaped bones, and they are formed by ossification of tendons. Tendons, the dense connective tissue which connects the muscle to the bone. And here patella, that is the kneecap, pisiform, pisiform is one of the wrist bone, the carpal, these are sesamoid bones. And there is one more bone, and that is fibula. However, this bone is not present in all people, only it is reported in 20% of the people, but this one is also a sesamoid bone. And last but not the least, that is the heterotypic bones. We don't have them, but other animals it is reported, and these are also called visceral bones. Now it is supposed that they may be part of a bone which has broken and reached to a soft organ, or they are formed by ossification in the soft organ. And here we have os cordis, as the name suggests, that is in the heart. So it is in the wall of the heart, and this is in deers and other ungulates in the heart wall. Os penis, that is in the penis, and this is in case of carnivores. Palpebrae is the term for eyelid. So this is in the eyelid of crocodiles. Falciparum, falciparum, this one is in the palm in case of moles where they dig the soil. Rostralis is a snout, in the snout of pigs. So these are few examples of the visceral bones found in other animals. Now let us take up a question. What happens if the bone of a frog is kept in dilute hydrochloric acid? Now it is, when we keep it in dilute hydrochloric acid, all the calcium will get removed. So it becomes flexible, it turns black, it breaks into pieces, it shrinks. So of course, if all the inorganic matter is removed, then only organic content is left out, and organic content will of course make it flexible. So it will easily bend. So that means our answer here is option number 1. So this brings us to the end of today's class, and in this class we have studied the various types of connective tissue, taking up loose connective tissue, dense connective tissue, and the skeletal connective tissue. The fluid connective tissue, as we said, we will be discussing in the later classes, and in the next class we will take up the other 2 animal tissues, that is the muscular and the nervous tissue. That's all for now. Thank you, students.